Welcome back. I am Sara Cook, a Senior Manager of Conservation Strategies at Wildlife Habitat Council. Thanks for joining us on our final panel of the day. I'm pleased to be moderating a unique group of speakers who will engage in conversation about how their organizations honor cultural connections to natural spaces through training and education. Joining us today, our first guest, Kevin Pierson, is the Chief of Conservation and Global Strategy at Bat Conservation International. He's the architect of Bat Conservation International's 2020 to 2025 strategic plan. He is known for aligning BCI with global trends in conservation, identifying opportunities in areas of disruption in the conservation space, and operationalizing landscape scale conservation. I would also like to introduce Jorge Calderon, the Director General of EarthLab Mexico. Jorge has over 25 years of experience as an architect in green design sustainability and is a lead accredited professional. At the EarthLab Mexico, Jorge and his team apply holistic approaches to conservation and strategically engage stakeholders to advance sustainable ecological goals that link private sector to local communities for the benefit of all. And our third panelist, Anne George, she's a senior biodiversity scientist at Freeport-McMoRan, where she conceives of, coordinates, and helps implement voluntary biodiversity projects for Freeport. While at the same time, she leverages those opportunities for STEM and environmental education. In her role as senior biodiversity scientist, Ms. George develops and facilitates productive relationships between Freeport and numerous nonprofit and community partners to promote longevity and sustainability of conservation projects. First in this panel, we'll go to Kevin Pierson for his opening statements.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Sara, so much. I'm just super excited to be here. Very appreciative, and thanks to all of you who've joined our discussion here and will be part of the Q&A later. So I work on conserving bats. I think bats are amazing. There are over 1,400 different species of bats all over the globe. They are mammals like us, and they are super important not only for the ecological reasons, but also economic reasons. So they eat insects, many of them which are pests. They pollinate plants that are important for seed dispersal. So just an amazing fauna to get to work with. But there are some real challenges. So about 34% are on a conservation list of some kind in trouble. And then almost another 20% on top of that are data deficient. So that's about half of the bats, half the species of bats that are in some kind of conservation attention or some type of research associated with it. So what Sara is clicking through is a couple of the slides that I have to give a little bit of background on one of the projects that we're working on in the Southwest United States, as well as throughout Mexico. And it's pretty much where a lot of my remarks later on in the panel as we go through some of the discussions are going to come from. So Sara, could you go back to that first slide?
Yep.
Just three quick images. So when we think of bats, certainly in North America, most of the time we're thinking about insectivorous bats or bats that eat insects. Those are the vast majority of them. And you've probably heard statistics about that a bat will consume its body weight every night in insects, or up to 1,200 mosquitoes an hour. And so all of that is true and pretty spectacular. But the project that I'm going to talk about, in the bats in particular, are pollinating bats. And so we have 3 species that are mainly in the Southwest United States and Mexico. And they're pollinators, and so they pollinate the flowers, just like we think of other pollinators. But they're critically important for agave, and of course, agave and all of its different products that we as humans can create with agave. And just like this meme, of course, a big one is tequila, but there's also different syrups and many kinds of uses. But Sara, if you'll pop to the second graphic. But when we look at every climate model that's out there, in particular for the Southwestern United States, And throughout the area that you see here in Mexico, it is a very drastic future that we see of drastic conditions, kind of exaggerated weather, heat, drought, poor conditions. And so when we look from the graphic on this side to the other side, what you're looking at is a huge loss of range of agave species, and the different colors represent species diversity. So you can see a real kind of shrinking of that, and those dots that are represented are some of the critical bat roosts that Bat Conservation Internationals and our partners are working on. And this is almost 75% loss in that overlap between agaves and bats. So that's really, really a scary story, both for the conservation of bats and those that are interested, as well as for agave. And so, Sarah, if you'd go to the last slide. And so we want to do something about it, and that's where a lot of my remarks today will come from, is our experience as Bat Conservation International and our partners, including Freeport-McMoRan and Ann. We've been working on a large landscape agave restoration project across that entire map, and you can see some of those activities on the screen here, where we've worked with local communities in the US, and then local communities in Mexico, and especially a particular type of community called an ejido, which is it's a group of people that share communal lands for farming and industry and different reasons. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about relates to that. And so again, I just am excited to be here and honored to be with my other panelists as we talk a little bit about communities. And so thank you, Sarah, very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. We appreciate those opening statements. Jorge, we'd like to turn it over to you to introduce the Earth Lab. Oh, Jorge, can't quite hear you. Let's try that again. Sorry, everyone.
There is?
There he is.
Wow, I almost finished my statement. I'm so sorry. I was saying that it's sharing to my colleagues and fellow partners in climate change mitigation and conservation commitment. At the Earth Lab, we are really appreciate this opportunity to participate on this dialogue in what I think is a very pressing and noble effort. Congratulations to WC for this effort. In our vision as a company, what we are trying to do is linking private initiative and productive projects with rural communities. I will explain in that along the presentation, but in order to understand this, Kevin mentioned a while ago the ejidos. We work with ejidos and comunidades, which are common land. Ejidos are kind of mix between private and common land. Comunidades are all common lands, and 52% of the Mexican territory is on their hands. So we have been working since 2006 with them, trying to look for a way to work properly. And in our company, we develop, among other areas, we devoted one for rural development, and we created some expertise on community engagement, geoforestry services, community training and workshop, social development and gender equality, carbon credits, and green finance projects. Next slide, please, Karen. Sarah. The main challenges in rural communities, among specifics that we can go through in the mind of the communities, is that on the one hand, you have your stakeholders, which are very numerous. Usually in these projects, you have the community by itself with their traditions and the special world vision. You have the investors, civil society and organizations, the international agenda, Paris Agreement, and so forth, multilateral alliances, government agencies, and on the other side, you have some objectives and attributes you need to give or you want to achieve with these projects. You need to make them attractive for people to get involved, the community and the investment. You need to humanize these projects because I think that's one of the mainly reasons that relations break with communities. You need to humanize this. You need to make it holistic. You need to take care of sustainability, long-term solutions, and very importantly, you need to achieve community engagement and development. So I will be speaking about our strategy, our method of doing so. Next slide, please. And well, I think I'll leave it there. One comment is that we believe, like Kofi Annan, that development has to be sustainable, but it has to be. So we work trying to make that bridge possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jorge. We appreciate that, and we hope the audience enjoyed hearing directly from our panelists a little bit about their organizations and their priorities. I'd like to get into the discussion portion of this time we have remaining, and to that end, Kevin, you mentioned that.
So Sarah, could I do a quick intro for Freeport before we move on?
Oh, geez, Anne, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh.
Not to worry, not to worry.
I'm in this office and I'm losing track. I apologize. Sorry, guys. Anne is a critical component of this. Give me 1 second.
Not to worry. I will be brief.
I will pull her background up. There we go. Sorry again. It's doing the slides and having the not my best effort. I apologize, Anne.
No worries. No, that's
fine. Anne, I will give it to you.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this panel. It's certainly a privilege to represent Freeport-McMoRan and join my other panelists. And I'll give you a quick overview of the company. Freeport-McMoRan is one of the world's largest publicly traded copper producers, and we're a significant producer of molybdenum and gold. And as you can see on the slide here, we have active mining operations in North and South America and Asia, as well as a significant portfolio of inactive or discontinued operations. And as a leading responsible copper producer, Freeport maintains a strong commitment to sustainable development, including environmental stewardship and social responsibility. We are also committed to respecting human rights across all of our business operations, and we prioritize the health and safety of not only our workforce, but the host communities where we operate. So during the course of this session, I hope to touch more on how investing in biodiversity and conservation is a part of Freeport's business ethic and certainly a key element of our sustainability programs.
Okay, thank you, Anne. I apologize again for not giving you that chance to introduce yourself properly. Now, everyone, we will enter into the discussion phase so that you can hear more from our guests. One thing, that we'd really like to get into is kind of discuss how culture and community inform decision-making across your organization. So, Kevin, earlier when you mentioned that you're working with ejido communities, what I'd be interested in sharing, or having you share rather, with the audience would be, what are some of the lessons that you've learned with respect to those ejido communities and the significance of cultural context while you're conducting these kind of cross-border activities around agave and bat conservation?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I thought about, probably two main lessons learned, and the first one is, sounds simple, but it's just be really, really helpful. what does that mean? I'll give you an example. When we first started working in Mexico on the agave restoration, we brought together many of the leading Mexican scientists, some of the U.S. scientists, different leaders, different conservation groups, and started working on trying to identify which ejidos we were going to be working with. And I remember very vividly, we had a big, huge list on the screen, and there were about 30 of us in the room in a hotel in Monterrey, Mexico. And it was all the different ejidos that were there. And about half of them, of the names that were on this list were kind of marked out with a no. And we were trying to decide where we were going to start our agave restorations and growing the seeds and all of that. And so we asked, well, why are these ejidos marked out? Why are they not going to be part of the program? And then the answer was, well, that their viveros or their greenhouses are not in good condition. We won't be able to raise any agaves here. And so then we asked, well, how much does it cost to repair or fix a greenhouse for one of these communities? And the answer was very, very little, not a lot of dollars. And so very quickly the project changed from being, we kind of softened our own mission and our own ideas of what we needed to do, and realized that there was more opportunity there. And so it really became a tenet of our agave restoration programs, is that we kind of now search out for those greenhouses that we can provide grants to and repair them to grow the amount of agaves that we need around and to do those different things. We actually need only about a quarter of most of this greenhouse space, and it goes to so many other things and produces so much goodwill, and it actually does more. And so it's just by being open to thinking about how you can really be helpful with our conservation programs, that helped. And the other thing that does is, so often you start solving bigger problems. So it wasn't just about, needing to do agave restoration or needing to be concerned about the bats. Now our project is also solving the problem of the community greenhouse, not being able to serve that ejido. And I think, my personal preference is that is the ambition that nonprofits and people that work with nonprofits need to have. What is the largest problem that we can solve? And that's an example. So be helpful. Lesson number one. I think the second lesson for us was to get help. Be very careful at the beginning of any time we go into an area of just asking yourself, are we culturally competent? And what resources do we need to have in order to operate in that area? And so for our agave restoration program alone, we have a strategic advisor that we hired, Dr. Ana Ibarra. Who has worked, she's a brilliant Mexican scientist, but she's also worked in all of the different communities, the ejido groups that we're working on, provides us direct advice on what we need, what makes sense, where to work, where not. Secondly, we were able to be successful enough with the project that we could hire a full-time project manager. So Dr. Kristen Lear, who did her PhD, studying these very communities and trying to understand in her doctorate, what were those relationships to agave? What are some of the incentives? What are those relationships with bats? So another level of expertise that we brought in. And very new is the Bat Conservation International. We've utilized 3 different consultants for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in particular, I'm very happy to get to work with Leander Lacey at Lacey Consulting Services. And so we're looking at things like making sure that we're involved with radical inclusion, bottom-up community mobilization. So the first one is be helpful. And I think that second lesson, for us was to just take a really good look at whether, what is your level of cultural competency and what are the resources that are out there that you can bring to the project.
Thank you for sharing those. I think we could all actually use those same lessons elsewhere in our lives, regardless of whether we're working on agave and bat projects and programming. But Jorge, I heard a lot of what Kevin was saying in terms of the community input and having that amplification and problem solving by getting down into a local context. And for you guys at the Earth Lab Mexico, WHC has the benefit of hearing kind of broadly how you work, and you're working not only where agave and bat populations migrate, but you're working across Mexico and Latin America. So can you tell us a little bit about how you activate entire communities around conservation and what tools are successful for your organization?
Okay, thank you, Sara. Absolutely. First of all, we need to start by understanding what we're dealing with. You need to learn their approach, their rich traditions, cultural habits. Some of them are millenary, and when you try to help them reach new horizons, the first thing you have to be is humble and open to learn. I think that's the main lesson that I have learned in all these years working with them. But if you can help me with some slides, I will appreciate to show you the methodology. I think it's easier to understand on the charrette.
Give me 1 second. Here we
Yes,
go.
in order
You should see it now.
Yes, to get all these audiences that I was talking about, the stakeholders and the objectives and attributes and the whole community complexity, which is a lot and is very variable throughout not only Latin America but throughout Mexico alone. It's very variable, very diverse. So we adapted this methodology from the National Charrette Institute, and we call it an air charrette, which we apply with some adjustments. And what we do is that we start with a lot of research and education for ourselves and for the community beforehand we start any project. Right now we're working with carbon credit projects, but we have worked with ecotourism and pollination, forestry, and so many others throughout Mexico. Now we are doing it in Latin America. So we do this approach first, and then we start working all our audiences, and then we start. We get to our main event, which is the charrette, which is a multi-day, multi-audiences participation event, in which you need to be very creative and make some dynamics and a lot of efforts to make the people communicate, the community people participate and communicate. There's some people who is now more prepared, but most of them we're working with Mayan people, which most of them don't speak Spanish or they don't read Spanish. So you need to be creative in getting them involved. And this is a process in which you get the first idea, then you go to public meeting and see the feedback, and then you create alternatives and go back and fine tune, and then you can get to a good result. So this is one way we have learned that work with the community. They feel they are important. They feel you are listening to them. I think this is the most important thing. We define our company as one that listens, integrates, and develops to mitigate. And that's the first point. You have to listen. When they feel they are part of the project, they will be very participative. They are very proud people. They have a lot of pride on their land, on their work, and they will do great things. And if we go to the next slide, Sara, please. I will talk a little bit about the other side. Don't destroy my presentation. I will go to the other side of the coin. You remember I mentioned that on one hand you have the stakeholders, and the other hand you have the community, and all these issues, and we have a common denominator in all our approaches with ejido and investors, is the lack of trust. So we came out since 2006 or 7 in other kind of development with a way to to make this trust possible. And first thing you need to do is get transparency. Nobody wants to give money to Jorge or to the Air Lab, or no investor or buyer want to give money to the ejido directly, which they don't know. They change every three years, and it's complicated. It's really complicated. So we came up with this idea of creating a fiduciary trust, a bank trust, or some other fiduciary institution, in which we put all the donations, all the money. In this case, the credits we obtain for the communities, they go into the trust, and the trust is this administrator, is this main master document to administrate everything. And through this trust, we go out to the public and sell the credits, whether they are carbon, biodiversity, social, water. We're starting to work with other kind of credits, and you do it through this trust. So the buyer will put the money to an institution, financial institution, and then at the end, at the right underside of the graphic, the money gets distributed accordingly with what you agree 1, 2, or 3 or 4 years ago. So once you set the conditions, they go forever. So this is a way that we have found that works for companies on the left side, for corporate citizenship, for impact investment, for grants, and so to make this take the risk out of the operation, or most of the risk is never risk-free, absolutely, but you take most of the risks out of the operation. I think I'll leave it there for the explanation of the methodology. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jorge. And it's an interesting model that you've used, that you solve the trust problem, in this way, that you're bringing together multiple stakeholders and investors, and you're really focused on kind of making communities part of the project. And from the Freeport perspective, it's a global organization. From that, lens, what role do stakeholders play in the decisions the organization you work for makes when implementing conservation and biodiversity activities within communities?
So that's a good question, and I'd say that at the foundation of everything Freeport does is a commitment to engagement and transparency with our stakeholders, because quite frankly, our social license to operate is directly dependent on those stakeholder relationships. So community engagement is how we ensure open dialogue and two-way communications. So on one hand, it allows community members to have input to our programs, and on the other hand, to ensure that we are adequately communicating what our local operations would look like, what our potential impacts could be, mitigation plans, and so on. Now, with our tribal partners especially, we seek to build trust. So very much like what Jorge just touched on, these long-term, mutually beneficial relationships, as opposed to one-off transactional interactions, if you will. And we seek to cultivate relationships that respect the cultural heritage of indigenous people. And many tribes, as I'm sure this group well knows, hold a deep respect for the natural environment. So the company's biodiversity activities that support that cultural heritage could include things like native plant harvests, agave salvage, vegetation transplanting efforts, and so on. So to go back to your question, I'd say that local stakeholders certainly play a key role in the company's decision-making around conservation and biodiversity.
Excellent, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And one other thing, in addition to building trust, and from BCI's perspective, Kevin, you did that by learning, right? So you built that trust once you identified key partners in the process. Were there any other partners besides, Anna and Kristen that really shaped your success or were critical to the success of your programming? And can you give us maybe some examples of how you were connected into the community as you're implementing these projects?
Sure, and a lot of it is just is us realizing that we are not the expert at all in this area. We know a lot about bats, but we know very little about these communities. I leaned heavily, just in this example, on CIMEX had worked in the area and had been funding Mexican wolf recovery in same kind of areas that we were doing bat conservation. And so I was able to, in that case, talk to a corporate partner who was very familiar and could give guidance when we were thinking about working with different areas, their own experience through their project, which had been going on for a much longer time. So that's one example. I would say that the thing that's probably newest for me as a professional and kind of tricky, both for nonprofits and I think for other partners, is this idea of accountability partners. Someone outside the project area who can provide some criticism or some viewing of that. We used the ejidos first, and thought about with many of our funders, what are some of the safeguards that we can put in place, before and after interviews. You could imagine those as questions about, what was the value of the project to you? There are third parties that can be out there, and I think that's a new frontier for us, and another reason that we do ask for help and we think about how to do this as well. But that's thought partners, implementing partners, funders are always I think has been the three legs of the stool. And I think now in this modern time, that idea of accountability partners is also something to consider.
Thank you for that. And again, each of your organizations has kind of provided unique perspectives where engaging kind of directly with communities is essential. Kevin's articulating from, the outside going in. Jorge is really in the communities. And then Anne, as a corporate representative, there are different challenges there. For you at Freeport, Anne, where does education and training fit into your projects and support that engagement and support those priorities that you outlined in the last section?
Sure. So Freeport invests both financially and programmatically into efforts that increase education and economic opportunity for citizens within our operating communities. So in fact, education and workforce development as a category is one of Freeport Foundation's priority areas. And annually, we invest about 1.5 million to 2 million specifically into STEM education and support leadership development activities that build capacity and allow communities to lead their own development towards sustainability. So this model of empowerment, I'd say, is especially important to help communities become self-sufficient, because at some point, the mine will close and Freeport will no longer be the primary employer in a region. So when we talk about achieving success, a vibrant, thriving, sustainable community that Freeport helped to enable, that is a success for the company.
Excellent, excellent. And Jorge, you talked a little bit about your model, and you talked about your earth charrettes and how you use those as a mechanism for engaging and training local human populations. But I'm curious to see how, what role the natural things and what, how do you leverage that to engage those stakeholders? In other words, tell us more about this training program that you have in place, and if you could share some examples, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. I have an example. Sara, please, if you can show one other slide, please. Everything was fine in planning, and the charrettes and the workshops and so. But then the next and I think most difficult stage is the implementation. So at this stage, what you need to be is very assertive and give crystal clear outlines of the goals to achieve, and you need a lot of education on this. Now you go you go to the site. You need to go to the working area, and work with the people who will be continuing the project or developing the project. They know their land, they are experts, they live there, they live by the land and for the land, but they need some fine tuning, and they are always willing to work with. But you need to be there. You need to be there at the beginning, at a very intensive. Sorry, that was not at very intensive steps, and make these objectives clear. In this case, we're working with CISAL Ejido in Yucatan, and the main project is to create carbon credits. They handle mangrove, but they have a very rich biodiversity, impressive. So they have jaguar, and they have crocodile, and so forth. They have 23 species of birds, and so we are helping them among just getting the credits, which will be sold sooner or later, to move forward with them. So that's where we come into our great alliance with Wildlife Habitat Council to get this project certified on biodiversity. And with CISAL, we're working in three certifications: training, intertidal project, and mammals project. So it broadens the scope of the job. And now we are starting to work with them in reforestation efforts throughout other experts, and so as Kevin said, this project can start as one thing, but there's a lot of opportunity to be creative and helpful in there. And the beauty of these efforts is that once you create trust, these projects gain momentum, and you get a domino effect, and start creating a sustainable and meaningful alliances like the one we have with WSC, and it allows you to upscale the projects. And if you go to the next slide, please, I will finish with that. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with the slide, but well, it looks interesting nonetheless. Just to give you an example of what we're doing to upscale this project, is that we plan this bonus del jaguar mayab, which is from the Mayan area jaguar, carbon credits and biodiversity credits and community credits. And we are planning this expedition to get people involved, to see that investors and organizations are willing to participate and willing to learn, and they are very enthusiastic. The communities are just, you can imagine how excited they are to share their culture, their food, their dances, their traditions, their places. They want us to be there 3 days in each community, which is impossible, but well, we're planning this later on this year because of COVID and hurricane right now coming soon to the peninsula. But we'll be visiting 12 communities in 3 different states from the peninsula, Yucatan in Mexico. But once you realize what you're doing, it gets very, very powerful, and makes you get some commitment very seriously. We are impacting over 1.3 million acres of land conservation. There are 12 communities there that they're getting, we will be getting around 12 million carbon credits in a couple of years. But most importantly of it, I think, is and that's what inspires us when you learn to be there, to see them, is that we are in the capacity of impacting over 6,000 families directly in these communities. So that's what keep us moving and struggling. And well, you're welcome to participate on this adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. That's an interesting project. And looking at the map and this expedition that you're planning, I see, some areas where some of our current corporate members might be conducting activities as well. So we'll certainly look to connect you outside of this panel. Kevin, I know you had referred earlier to a case study where you're working on the ground to impact bat populations and provide necessary habitat. Would you like to talk a little bit about that in our last couple minutes before questions?
So I have there's in my deck, there's a couple of slides. Okay, so this is maybe a different take, but just some closing remarks, Sarah. I think just thinking about this panel before we go to questions, this is what we all want. This is a kind of a beautiful picture here. You can see a distillado to the upper right. This is an Ejido San Joaquin in Northeast Mexico. We had been working in this ejido for maybe a year, and like Jorge said, the importance to humanize a project, the importance of being there for school programs, murals, festivals, and I think that just time spent equals trust. And so this was not part of a grant to paint this mural of bats and agaves. And this is now, as we drive by this is the most indicative thing you now see. This is a highway, a picture from the main road that looks onto this ejido landscape. And there's a story that is told here of bats and agave and just this deep connection. And so I think both audience members and panelists, this is something that's really special when it happens in these communities. And so if you would just kind of my last slide here too. So this is just a very simple graphic where we started to overlay and you can see also, as Jorge mentioned, different Wildlife Habitat Council either projects or members are here. And so there is a really big opportunity to get involved with this agave restoration, to be involved with Bat Conservation International or others. In fact, being part of one of the things that we worked with the Habitat Council last year was to make being a part of this project is a pathway to certification. And so I know you were going to kind of ask how can people be involved with this? Well, in this case, very directly, and you can go ahead and close that down, and I'll finish up. On the website right now, on WHC's website, you can search for bats and agave, and there's a webinar that explains the ability to be certified and how you would work both with the different communities and actually be involved in all these different things that the four of us have been talking about today. So just wanted, as we close, Sarah, to mention that was available, and that it does seem like there's a pretty big overlap and opportunity between WHC membership and all of these different projects and all of these different areas that we've been talking about.
Yeah, we appreciate that. A little bit of a plug there, Kevin. I recognize that map. That's a newer one in our suite. But what you've identified here are some alignments and some overlaps. And Anne talked a little bit earlier about aligning corporate priorities with cultural and local priorities. And do you want to share, before we go to questions, any examples of where Freeport is doing this, a plant kind of project, but also aligning that with a larger objective or a larger need in education, training, conservation, et cetera?
Well, I certainly will, and perhaps I too will close out with a case study to nicely illustrate that point. The natural environment can often become the unifying context, if you will, to engage local stakeholders, especially when a project is occurring within a community where people live and work, right? So the case study that I'll touch on quickly before we close is from our El Arbor operations in Chile. And that site, El Arbor site, is located in the Altiplano region in northern Chile. It's a hyper-arid region that is characterized with salt flats, and it has a number of unique species. Those salt flats, or salars, have been used for generations by the indigenous community, both as a place for ceremonies and recreationally. So it's very much embedded into the community's cultural heritage. So since water from the salar is also used by the mine as part of their environmental requirements, El Arbor committed to restoring and revegetating part of one of those salars. And in order to facilitate that process, El Arbor built a greenhouse for native plant grow-outs, and they trained a number of members from the indigenous Ascotan community in the management and production of native flora in the greenhouse. Now, how that came about was twofold. During the community engagement process, the indigenous community requested training and capacity development so that they too would benefit from El Arbor's revegetation project. And in turn, El Arbor recognized the need for the community to be active participants because it's a means to advance their relationships while still respecting the cultural heritage of the indigenous people. And so that, I'm hoping nicely encapsulates how the natural environment formed, the scaffolding for engagement, and is hopefully representative of what as a company we are trying to do across our communities.
That's a really good example of kind of more than one priority being addressed comprehensively. And then it interestingly ties back to a greenhouse, which Kevin mentioned earlier. I want to leave the last 10, 12 minutes here for some questions from the audience. And I have several sitting in the queue. The first one I'm going to kick to Jorge. Jorge, we have a question. Can you expand on what you mean by humanizing a project?
Who was that? Well, when there's money involved, and there should be, because to make a project sustainable, money needs to be playing. You need to understand that what you are impacting is much more deeper than the pockets of the people. They actually get very little money because they are big communities. There are maybe 400 or 1,000 or more community members. So once you get some help from sales or whatever, you get some income. It's very little money what they get, but they like to learn, they like to participate, they like to be part of that of the event, and they feel good. And I don't know how to translate this, but it makes you feel really fulfill, to see this participation. So yes, there is time targets to meet, there is money involved, there's financial issues to meet, there's legal issues to meet, but you got to be in their shoes. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. You need to work with them and for them. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, that's a good way to put it. And I think all of you have given excellent examples and made statements that have a common thread around that concept. I have a question now, shifting gears a little bit for Kevin, I think, and it has to do with, are there ways to assist these bat and agave initiatives as a community member in the Southwest US?
Yes, we have. The program started it more with the first year of it pilots in the U.S. and we have it's similar in terms of what we end up doing in terms of planting agave. Freeport helped us recover some agaves that were going to be destroyed due to some construction, but we have programs in the American Southwest where we do plantings. We also work with a variety of partners. Some of you may have worked with Borderlands Institute. They're one of our big partners. And so both watch the webinar, I saw it in chat, has some additional information about ways that you can connect, and then connect with us, BCI as well. If there's principally there's just a number of different agave planting things that go on. There's also a number of agave festivals. There's bat-friendly tequila that you can purchase and consume. That's one way, if that's what you're doing. So that would be really the first step. It's a very short webinar. My colleague Malia Bayless did it. I think it's really great. It has a lot of information there. And then if that doesn't do it for you, Sara, just have them get in contact with me, figure out what state they're talking about, what region, and there's a lot of activities either through BCI or other partners to do this kind of restoration, and as well as if you're interested in maybe monitoring your local bats, that's another big help for us. As part of my introduction, we have a lot of questions still about the health and availability of bats.
That's a good point, Kevin, and thanks for volunteering to take some additional questions outside of this. And certainly you're welcome to reach out to Wildlife Habitat Council directly. Our conservation specialists are experts, and we collaborate extensively with BCI. We can put you in touch with the right folks. And you actually kind of queued up one of the other questions in the audience nicely, and this one's for Anne, I think, because as Kevin mentioned, Freeport has experience engaging in bat and agave restoration projects. And this audience member is asking, are there ways that an employee of a company can assist community engagement activities? And I think that kind of speaks to another question we were going to potentially discuss, and that's the role employees play. So if you could elaborate a little bit on those opportunities and the role that company staff play in being successful.
So I would emphatically say yes, there are roles that employees can play. In Freeport specifically, employee volunteerism is one of our priorities. We do a lot through volunteerism. And there are opportunities to do projects not only on site, on Freeport property, but off site. So within the communities where we operate. And I suspect that model is not unique to Freeport. A number of other companies would do that also. But the nice thing about doing these off-site projects is that your partners also become your participants. So your school-age students or retirees or other members of the community can participate in your biodiversity projects, whether it's an agave planting or a pollinator garden or a green infrastructure opportunity. There really are boundless possibilities and opportunities to do that.
Thank you for that. And again, we have what we call the WHC Index online. For those of you in the audience who aren't familiar, you can go there and search by company if you want, state, region, country, and even type of project in some cases, and find how other companies are engaging in these activities globally through our certification pipeline. Jorge, I have another question for you. And that is, how do I learn more about what ejido communities are engaging in Mexico? In particular, is there a way for international support to come in to your organization, and participate in an excursion, for example? There's a lot of interest generated on your excursion.
Well, how can you get involved? Well, just decide to get involved. Absolutely. One thing that we start always with is to go through, make a due diligence on the ejidos. Most of them are organized, but not all of them. So we look first of all on their governance, and if they have good governance, then it's a go. To participate with them, and just this fiduciary model that I talk about is what we implemented and we use, because I think it's a safe way and transparent way to participate. So yes, if somebody wants to participate, it's more than welcome. And the expedition it was planned for this summer, but the hurricane season and the COVID didn't make it possible. So I think it's going to be in November. So it's plenty of time to participate. And yes, we want to empower, upscale these projects. It doesn't matter if it is not carbon credit. We're working a lot on biodiversity, on jaguar especially, but among other things. And if there are some other interests, I don't know, but there I don't see much movement there in the map. But other pollinators or whatever, yes, we will be more than likely to take this help and these efforts to the communities.
Excellent. I assumed you would say that. Another question was if companies can reach out directly for where they have operations in Mexico and Latin America to the Earth Lab Mexico. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. It sounds like that is encouraged, and certainly WHC will help facilitate that because we're proud partners with the Earth Lab Mexico to expand our ability to connect our members as well as their conservation activities. I don't see too many more questions that we haven't at least touched on. I do want to give everyone an opportunity to make one last kind of final statement, one last key lesson. I think we've heard a lot of similarities, even from your different lenses throughout this process, and just kind of want to leave it to you to put your final stamp on this panel today. I'll start with Anne.
Thanks, Sara. So we do get asked sometimes by staff within our own sites, or sometimes even by external member companies, how do you get started on these kinds of programs? If you're starting from the ground up, what do you do? And I would say always start small. This is a lesson I learned from WHC, so thank you for that. Start small and build from there, and certainly cultivate strong partnerships, because the success of your project or program is hinged very closely to your partnerships. And as that project or program grows, celebrate each milestone and success with your partners.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Anne, and we appreciate that coming from your perspective. I think it carries a little more weight than from ourselves. But Kevin, how about you? I know you gave us a lovely case study, but can you kind of wrap it up for us today as far as the panel?
I guess as I think about the audience and I think about the panel, I mean, community engagement is critical for all of us. And for that to be successful is critical. And if I could put a plug in for conservation as a very powerful way to engage communities. People can get their hands dirty. They can instantly see from one day to the next what they've been able to do. And it's just a way to connect people on a very deep way. And especially as Jorge was kind of mentioning, when you're adding multiple value even beyond that, it makes for an incredibly rewarding and rich experience for everybody that's involved. And I think conservation is a really important and great way to do that. And so I hope everybody can kind of be inspired to think about where there's an opportunity to connect a local conservation group or any of us here on this panel.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Excellent. Jorge, final thought from you today?
Yes, I think one closing statement could be that we, as I mentioned at the beginning, are trying to be the bridge between companies and communities. And yes, I love wilderness, and yes, I love conservation, and I love communities, but there's they need to live by something. So we need to understand that our projects need to make economic impact on them for them to work, and that's sustainability for me. So I think that will be my final statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Jorge. And thanks to our panel and everyone joining us today. In 30 minutes, we're going to host our networking happy hour. There are 3 themed rooms you can go into. There's gardening, there's travel, there's a healthy living discussion. WHC will have a host in each to keep the conversation going. Come and join us, engage in dialogue, or just sit back and relax for a few minutes. And don't forget to join us tomorrow for the 2nd day of our conference with photographer Tina Claffey. And thank you. We will see you later.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye-bye.